Welcome today to episode 3 of Setting the Hook, the show where I read first chapters of novels and I look into the writing mechanics that authors use to hook readers and keep them turning the page. I hope that you all have had a wonderful weekend or week, and if you haven't watched the past episodes, maybe go check those out. Give us a subscribe, a like, share the videos, or go ahead and go down to the description and submit your writing if you would like to have one of your works maybe featured on the channel. All right, so let's get into it. The first fiction we're going to look at today is called The Boundless Bonnie Vine by McFistbeard. Now, this tells the story of Bonnie, an average schoolgirl who wakes up one day to find an old man with a funny hat and robe knocking on her door. She reluctantly answers, and he tells her that she is the chosen one. She does what any rational-minded teenage girl might and calls the police. Well, as it turns out, that's not the last time she would be seeing him. Monday rolls around, and Bonnie goes off to school. The day begins normal enough. That is, until she sees the old man in the parking lot. Once again, she does what any rational-minded teenage girl might, and she breaks out her cell phone, and she begins to call the police. But then, a shadowy man in a black hood appears, and all hell breaks loose. Next thing you know, Bonnie and her friend San are falling through a swirling vortex. Okay, so that is a pretty fun setup, if I do say so myself. I think maybe you will agree, depending on your taste. All right, so the first pro for this story is that it has a very strong narrative voice. Who'd have thought that someone who goes by McFistbeard would write with such a fun, whimsical voice? Yeah, well, that's exactly what's happening here. He has a very strong, the narrator of the story has a very strong grip on how we perceive the events, and it's a lot of fun. It kind of reads almost like a young adult, or maybe something like influenced by like Harry Potter or like Series of Unfortunate Events. Not as heavy-handed as Series of Unfortunate Events, of course, but that kind of silly, not afraid to lean into the silly and absurd. So that takes us right into our second pro today, which is the way that this author is very skilled at crafting these outrageous situations and allowing the main character to react kind of just as we would expect one to in real life. Oftentimes in books, you're reading and you're kind of thinking, that's maybe not how I would have reacted to that situation. Maybe that's just to kind of move the plot along and, what was necessary at the time. But that's not the case here. Here, Bonnie reacts kind of like a real teenage girl might often, and it ends up just like really silly and funny because of those like outrageous circumstances. I think that is one of the things that makes these characters feel relatable and likable. All right, the third pro. It takes a very common trope and spins it in a fun way. That common trope kind of being the chosen one. Many times someone is the chosen one, and they're maybe a little bit reluctant, but eventually they kind of just are quick to accept that, like, yeah, who doesn't want to be the chosen one? This one is much more absurd and kind of silly in the sense that, she's like, all right, this guy is a lunatic. And so the tone that is promised in this first chapter kind of assures a reader that there will be plenty more of those hilarious reactions and outrageous situations to come. Just a lot of fun. The last pro I'm going to talk about for this one is that it 100% just feels like the setup for an Iske-style portal to another world story. Just with her and her friend falling through this vortex in the ground. I only read chapter 1, so who knows? Maybe she wakes up and she was imagining the portal. Maybe she wakes up just in the hospital and this one's just going to stay in our real world. But my gut tells me that she's going off to some magical world now. So if any of that sounds good, you should go check this out. Let's get into a quick con, as I like to do with these stories. I always like to find something to be critical about, even when oftentimes these stories that I'm picking are ones that I thought were really fun and solid and worth your time. So the con today for this one is maybe not a con, as often they are in these videos, or are not. The tone is quirky and silly. You've probably gathered that by watching this far and listening to my prose. But if you are looking for something grim or serious or whatnot, this is probably not for you. This one definitely leans into that wackiness and humor, which I find really fun. I feel like it can't always just be grim and serious, or sometimes that kind of grates on me. So I love to see something like this with a really unique narrative voice that is like strong and puts its own twist on everything. It makes it really fun. Right now I'm reading The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi, and that's another one where it just has that strong narrative voice that's like kind of quirky and sarcastic and has that humor. So if you are a fan of those kinds of stories, go check this one out. Follow the link in the description, and let's move on in to story number 2. Okay, so story number 2 is Rat's Guide to Survival by Boptodatop. And let's just take a pause for a moment and acknowledge what a fun author pen name that is. I feel like we've got some really fun pen names to start this episode, so I hope that you will also find those kind of fun. It kind of makes me self-conscious about my pen name, like, dang, should mine be more fun? What the heck? Rat's Guide to Survival by Boptodatop tells the story of Niall, a young street rat trying his best to survive in an unforgiving city. It begins with him rushing across town to get to a mysterious place called the Creed. Starving and desperate, this place promises food and work for young Niall. That is, if he can get there before the other rats. Upon arrival, he discovers he's too late and is turned away, belly rumbling. So, he decides to steal some food on his way out. This proves to be a bad decision. An assassin named Bismuth notices Niall stealing, and it rubs him the wrong way. He sends a gang of rats after him. When they catch up with him, a scrap occurs that leaves him beaten and left for dead. Okay, so let's get into the prose. First, very nice prose and skilled storytelling. Some writers, you can just tell, read a lot of the genre they write in, and that feels true for this story written by Boptodatop. The story here has a nice flow, and it moves from storytelling beat to storytelling beat really smoothly and just makes for a very easy and fun reading experience. I could kind of imagine it all cinematically in my head, the way that he was describing it, and just a very nice mix of action with inner monologue and description. So, second prose was we have some really neat world building here. It never bogs down with exposition dumps, which is beautiful. I cannot stand when I read some fictions and it's just like exposition, just like pouring it in on you, and you're like, I don't care about any of this yet. Let me get into it and just kind of see it through the eyes of the character. Well, that's exactly what we have here. We get right into the story following Niall as we explore this world through his eyes. And I just also, personally, this is a preference thing again, but I like stories like this, with kids being weaponized by gangs or criminals. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but I like that in my fiction. Kind of almost like Lies of Lachlan Mora, when they kind of begin as like child criminals. And there's just something fun and like endearing about that. All right, so let's get into the cons. Once again, the most minor of cons. This is a really fun read, and I would encourage you to check it out if anything I said above sounds intriguing to you. But the only con I have for this one is a spot where the criminal organization weaponizing the rats is referred to as the Assassins of the Creed. Again, this is probably just me, and maybe no one else noticed this, or it didn't feel odd to anyone else, but like, to me, it's like any other name would probably be better than using the name of like one of the most popular video games of the last 10 or 20 years. But I might be wrong. Chime in the comments. Is that wrong of me to think? It could be, So yeah, that could just be something I'm thinking. And again, it's so minor that's not really going to take you out of the story or like ruin your enjoyment of it. It's just something that like I got across that and I was like, Assassins of the Creed. All right, our third fiction for episode 3 of Setting the Hook. This one is going to be fun for all you lit RPG folks out there. You will just be, saying, hallelujah, lit RPG stuff. This is a lit RPG story. This one is called The Legendary Method Actor by BabyFlik. It is the story of Alex Chen, a talented theater actor whose world is turned upside down when he is murdered on stage. He wakes up in a new world and finds himself in the body of a young boy. As he comes to terms with the fact that he is now young Ray Croft, he discovers a mysterious system prompt that informs him he can select an archetype from a list. Still in shock, he ignores this and goes to collect his thoughts by a tree. That's going okay until a wolf attacks. The system decides to select an archetype for him. Donning the grizzled veteran archetype, Ray is able to defeat the wolf. He has survived his first encounter, but he is full of questions surrounding this new world and archetype system. Okay, let's get into the pros of this third story. So, first pro is just lovely writing here. The prose is poetic while managing to keep the story moving at a quick pace, which, as many of you are probably writers yourself if you're watching this, and that's a hard thing to balance. It's like finding the line between when you're just getting too poetic and you're waxing poetic and you're kind of going off on like a tangent about describing things that aren't important, and finding that line is really a delicate dance. But right here on this one, BabyFlik finds another fun name, by the way. BabyFlik just really finds that line and does a great job. There was a few lines in this that I thought were really pretty and poetic, but they never bogged the story down. So awesome work on that. The second pro is this is a unique concept. I haven't seen one like this before. And I thought it was really neat. As someone who likes to write and direct and make little short films and do things like that, the idea of a main character who starts as an actor, then once teleported into this kind of lit RPG world, utilizes a magic system that ties into his background, is just clever. I like that. I like that a lot. So yeah, kudos on that. That's really neat. The third pro is, the author does a great job of planting seeds of what is to come, in the form of the introduction we get to the family of Ray Croft. And these people kind of seem a little bit like affluent and as if, they don't really like young Ray. Maybe they view him as like a threat or a burden or something. I don't know. It's hard to say from just the first chapter, but it's kind of planted in this that something is up there with that family dynamic. So I think that there's something really captivating about that. The idea that, Alex is suddenly dropped into the world of this Ray Croft character and, now kind of inherits his family dynamic and his problems. So I find that really cool. Very nicely done, very smoothly done, Yeah, all right. So let's get to the cons. Again, the most minor of cons, probably not even a thing at all, but I always like to try to find at least one thing to be critical of, just for the sake of, making sure that these reviews aren't just constant praise with no constructive elements. Also, just for the record, I find that critiquing others' work is a skill just as much as writing is. And it's something that I am kind of trying to get better at all the time. So if you have tips for how you like to critique writing or give constructive criticism, drop those in the comments because I would love to hear it to try to improve my own skills. So the one spot that kind of tripped me up was when Alex first enters the new world, kind of the life of Raycroft, he immediately knows the name of a server girl. And it just makes me, in the moment, I was like, well, how does he know that name? But it makes sense because later you find out that he has memories from this new life surging through him and kind of like slowly drip feeding into him as he's like processing things. So it does make sense that he knows the servant at his family's manor. Thank you for watching episode 3 of Setting the Hook. You are all awesome for submitting your work to be critiqued and featured. It's not an easy thing to do. Taking constructive criticism of something so personal like your writing or art is really tough, and that's also a skill, that needs to be developed over time. I really experienced that a lot when I went to art school. You would get these assignments and you would have to just go up in front of the class and get like picked apart by the class. And, at the time I remember really hating that and really feeling kind of bummed out and anxious to have to do that. But as I moved along into my career as a graphic designer, web designer, it became incredibly useful because that happens all the time. You're pitching ideas and you're pitching things that you've poured your heart into, only for them to sometimes get shut down or to be picked apart, or, sometimes they're loved, and that's great too. But I think that is a skill and a area that can be really helpful for writers. Especially is like learning to develop that kind of skin. So I hope none of these cons that I say about any of these fictions ever feel like mean-hearted or anything. They're totally not meant to be that. They are just, I'm trying to get better about finding something that maybe, just makes a writer think, okay, yeah, I'll think about that a little bit when I'm writing. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week, and please go submit your work at the link in the description on the Railroad forum post, and it just might be featured in one of the future episodes of Setting the Hook. All right, cheers.